Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. And today I have a very special guest who will probably be a more regular guest than has been in the past here. This is Andy. Andy and I have been working together for almost 3 years now. She was the very first person to come onto the team. And she's a little bit of a jack of all trades. Her official title is an admin or assistant, and she is so much more than that. So she's going to be kind of hopping on the podcast with me here and there to help guide questions and potentially reel me in on some of the tangents I go on and help and support. Today's topic, oh, Andy, if you want to say hi before I just start jumping right in here. Awesome. Okay. So I am super excited about today's topic. And this has been coming up a lot, and this has been something that I've been playing with for a little while now. And I just get a lot of feedback from people I'm talking to right now of putting labs, whether that's blood work or other functional labs, into different AI services and using that as a tool to interpret and then also offer suggestions as far as protocols, diet, lifestyle changes, supplements, like all that kind of stuff. And some of it's good, some of it is not great. And what I want to go through is I'm going to go through a series of 3 different examples. And I don't know if we may end up splitting this into multiple episodes. I'm not totally sure yet because I'm not totally sure how much I'm going to be talking about each one. I have a feeling this one and one of the other tests, we're going to start with blood work. And then we're going to do one of the other ones I'm going to do is the organic acids test. That's going to be a longer one. The Dutch test probably won't be quite as long, but I'm going to go through these 3 tests with real life examples. These are real test results we have from a variety of clients. It's also not the same client for reference. I wanted to give 3 very different examples. And I want to go through what we're going to use ChatGPT specifically as an example, although I know there are many other AI services out there, but I think this is a pretty good representation of positive, negatives, and some things to think about when it comes to lab interpretation and or protocol recommendations and AI. And once again, there's value in some of these. Some of the things ChatGPT gets horribly wrong. Some of it does a pretty decent job. And so I want to just go through all of this using these examples to help you better understand where there can be value in using AI services like this, and where having someone look at these things who has the knowledge, has the background, and also has the practical experience really in how this plays out here. So we're going to start with some blood work. And so we took one of the most common panels, and probably one of the panels that I like the most is our quote unquote nutrient panel. And it's a pretty comprehensive list of labs, plus we get a bunch of other individual nutrients in there. This is a panel I run on myself every 6 to 12 months. This is something that I highly recommend as a really good annual physical kind of lab testing to get done. And so it has a lot of stuff in it. So I'm super excited to be able to share this one and once again, go through all of this. So we start with cholesterol here, and the first couple values, you already may not know what they are and what they refer to. So APO, I'm going to abbreviate APOA and APOB, which are the first kind of 2 markers when we look at this kind of lab work here. And these are better markers of cholesterol and lipoproteins within the blood vessels. If you go back and listen to our blood testing episode, we talk a lot about cholesterol and how the way standard and Western medicine looks at and runs cholesterol, it's not great, especially if we are looking at true heart health and actual risk of heart events when it comes to lipoprotein buildup within our actual blood vessels. And APOA and APOB are more detailed than the standard LDL, HDL triglycerides when it comes to lipoproteins within the actual blood vessels. An NMR lipoprofile is going to be even better than this. APOA and APOB are also a little bit cheaper to run versus a full NMR lipoprofile. So just a little background there in case you don't know this. So for this one in particular, it did not mark APOA, it marked APOB on here. And what is actually interesting is it actually gets this wrong right off the bat. So APOB is listed as 191 on ChatGPT. So in the actual lab work, which once again, I put the lab straight into ChatGPT and just said, interpret this blood work for me. APOA is actually 191, not APOB. So that's the first kind of big difference here. And I'm going to run through ChatGPT's kind of interpretation on the actual lab markers, and then I'm going to do mine, and then we're going to look at specifically supplementation because I think this is a really important piece to it. I'll say that I've run all three of these that we're going to talk about today, and the diet and lifestyle changes are largely very similar. So I'm not going to super go into that because it's almost always do an anti-inflammatory diet, limit sugar, focus on getting the nutrients that you need. Mediterranean diet comes up quite a bit. So very, in my opinion, Western medicine. So looking down here, it doesn't mark anything else here. It kind of breaks it up by sections. We have the APOA, APOB, and then we move into the actual lipid profile here. So LDL 86, it marked it as, let's see, acceptable. HDL, fine, triglycerides, a little elevated. And it's interesting that they use 150 or under. I'm going to talk about my particular opinions on that here as we go. But, if we look at individual markers, so APOA as 191. So in my opinion, this is trending a bit high, but not super high. This marker, in my opinion, so the range that we typically use is 120 to 200. So we're erring on the side of high. However, this should not be under 90 or under 80. And this is a massive kind of mistake that ChatGPT ran for this. So APOB, yes, APOB, I look at under 90 is really what the goal is here. And APOB in this particular case is 65, which is great, super good. APOA is the one that is trending just a little bit high. And the ratio I would consider to be okay, not great, and pretty darn okay, meaning that their actual heart health is probably okay. And I am a little bit curious what is driving up this APOA marker going on here when it comes to cardiovascular health. Now, when I actually look at the lipids here, so we look at LDL, HDL, triglycerides. So I really don't look at total cholesterol. And the reason being is total cholesterol is just your LDL and HDL added up together, which is fine. And those actual individual markers make a much bigger difference here. So LDL 86, HDL 79. So both of these actually create a little bit of a red flag for me. And the reason being is LDL is trending a little bit low. And LDL is commonly referred to as like the bad cholesterol. FYI, there is no good, there is no bad cholesterol. Cholesterol is a carrier unit. It is neither good nor bad. It is important. It is important that we not have too much and important that we have enough as well. So I would argue this is actually a little bit of a red flag. Once again, like, why is this trending just a little bit low? 80 is the low end of my range when it comes to LDL. HDL 80 is my high end range. And so we're trending a little bit high on that. And then looking at triglycerides, yeah, I would consider those slightly elevated. Typically, the range I'm going to use, now this does depend person to person, is going to be 50 to 100, in which case, yeah, we're a little bit higher. So I'm going to start to question once again, like, this is a little bit of a weird pattern. And so I'm asking a lot of questions here. Why? What is already starting to go on here that is triggering some interesting, we'll say suboptimal lipid markers here? So then we get into blood sugar. I'm going to scroll down here just a little bit here so we can look at this. So hemoglobin H1C, once again, I would consider this a little bit high. 5.4 is my high end range, and ChatGPT says this is totally fine. C-peptide, 0.4. I would also, so this is actually another wrong thing that it did. 0.4 is actually related to CRP, not C-peptide. C-peptide is actually listed on this panel as 2.1, not 0.4. It mixed this up. And if you look down below, HSCRP is 2.1 versus the C-peptide. So it's already struggling a little bit. And I uploaded this as a PDF format for reference. So it is not the formatting of this particular document that is the issue here. So if we actually look at C-peptide, C-peptide is 2.1, which is trending a little bit on the higher side of my end range here. Insulin, 5.1, on the lower end of normal. This is actually the higher end of normal for me. 2 to 6 is typically the range I'm going to look at. I would consider that 5.1 pretty darn okay. Now, one thing that's really important to distinguish is insulin varies quite a bit. It goes up and down quite a bit. These are also fasted labs. So food is not an influence here. This person went in with an overnight fast, did not eat or drink anything the morning of. Whereas C-peptide is on the high end of normal. C-peptide is a more stable marker of insulin when we look into this. So once again, like I'm having some little bit of red flags here as far as what may be triggering some of this weird cholesterol stuff, and then also some blood sugar stuff kind of going on here. So if I keep going down, so inflammation, yeah, CRP is actually what did I say? 0.4, which I would consider to be great. In which case, ChatGPT just didn't read it correctly, which once again, if you don't know these ranges and you're not very well educated on the blood work, this could come up as a little bit scary for someone. So liver and kidney function here kind of moving forward. So if we look at the metabolic panel, this is where this is going to come up. AST, ALT, ChatGPT marks this on the lower end of normal, not alarming, but you may experience fatigue and or malaise. I would argue that these are awesome. These are great numbers. 10 to 20 is really where I'm looking at for both of these. And once again, I think these are totally fine, totally great. Now, GGT is another kind of liver marker. Came back as 5. Once again, my range is going to be 10 to 20, just like AST and ALT. ChatGPT says this is excellent. I would consider this low, which is an indication of a B6 deficiency, in which case we may see some issues with mental and emotional health. This plays a really big role in neurotransmitters. And when I see a B6 deficiency, once again, I'm going back to kind of the lipid profile here. When we think about lipids, lipids are carrier units. If we've got some weird things going on with those cholesterol markers, we may experience some mental and emotional issues and or we may experience some weird hormonal imbalances going on. So all of a sudden, I'm really thinking about all of this as to, okay, but why? What is really like playing the game here as to why these are coming up, why these are coming up as a little bit weird. And I would agree the BUN creatinine ratio is good, and the EGFR is also quite good at 114. Looking at vitamin and mineral status. So this is going to be one of my favorites to go over here because I have some pretty different opinions when it comes to this. So the first thing of vitamin D, 76. I know anytime I talk about this, I always get a lot of questions about this because most of Western medicine definitely doesn't view it as this, but really in particular, holistic health of any sort, functional medicine, has some pretty wild ideas about vitamin D, and largely it's coming from people not understanding the true physiology behind how vitamin D actually works. So at 76.6, I would consider far too high. And I would expect some of the immune system to, some things to be hiding underneath the immune system, because this can upregulate the immune system and mask different things. And I am going to get into that because there is a particular pattern that I'm going to talk about when it comes to this lab work in particular that we do often see. B12, this ChatGPT considers this very moderate. I would consider this quite low. I like to see typically B12 at least 5 or 600. I say 600 is a little bit more optimal. Between 600 and about 1,000-ish. A little bit kind of depends on the person and what we're dealing with and all that kind of stuff. Folic acid, yeah, I also agree that this looks great and is very, very optimal. Magnesium is a big one. Once again, pretty wildly different opinions here. So ChatGPT considers this high in the upper range at 5.4. I would consider this low. The range that I typically like to see is between 6 and 6.8 when it comes to magnesium, when it's RBC. Now, there are two different tests for magnesium. This, make sure you're looking at the right one if you are comparing your own labs to this. So I would consider this low. Zinc, 86, low normal. Optimal, we actually, ChatGPT and I agree pretty closely. I would consider 90 to 120 my optimal. So that's a pretty close one, which I was very, very happy to see. Copper, definitely copper is high. I totally agree with ChatGPT's analysis that copper is trending a bit high. My range is 80 to 120 when it comes to this. And more importantly, which I was really happy to see ChatGPT mention here, is the zinc and copper ratio. It is absolutely suboptimal, this ratio. So we've got zinc trending low, copper trending high, and this is a big issue. And so there's a lot of different types of issues that we can see when it comes to this. So the question is, once again, okay, why? Why is this going on? Which I'm going to come back to. If we look at phosphorus, I would consider slightly low. 3 to 4 is my range. Maybe we need, the first thing I would look at when I see phosphorus at 3 is going to be stomach acid production. And are we having some issues digesting protein in particular? In which case, stomach acid production plays a really big role here. Thyroid panel. So this is a good one to go over too. So TSH at 2.4, yeah, I would agree. This is pretty darn good, except TSH on this particular lab is 1.04. It took uric acid at 2.4 and not TSH at 1.04. So once again, just be really mindful if you're using AI services, make sure it's looking at the right thing, because this TSH at 1.04 is trending quite low. 1 to 1.5 are the low end ranges. Now, a big thing when it comes to thyroid health is we need to look at, one, the full picture, two, people feel differently at different thyroid markers. For me, my ideal TSH is between about 1.8 and 2.2. That's where I feel the best. Anything lower or higher, I typically don't feel as good, especially as someone with a history of thyroid issues. And I know some other people with some thyroid issues, and they actually feel better at closer to 1.5. So in this case, I would dive deeper into what symptoms is this person experiencing? How are they feeling? Are they showing signs of some thyroid dysfunction going on? And also, bigger picture, what else could be impacting the thyroid here? Looking at free T3, 2.8, that is correct. I also would consider this on the low side. 3 to 4 is typically where I land with free T3. Now, when it comes to T3, the first thing, if I see a low conversion rate from T4 to T3, is going to be, number one, the liver. About 60% of T4 is converted to T3 in the liver. Another 20% is done in the gut. So the question is, okay, why? Why is there a conversion issue? And let's also look at the free T4, which We look at the free T4, we're looking at 1.05, which I would also consider on the lower end. 1 to 1.6 is typically where I'm going to land here. So we're not converting enough. And also we're starting to see some trends of everything when it comes to the thyroid so far, TSH, free T3, free T4 on the low side. And this is a very common pattern that we will see that is often linked to stress, which once again, we're going to get into stress, what kind of stress is going on, internal, external, potentially both. When it comes to reverse T3, they consider this normal and possible underconversion of T4 to T3, which once again, yes, I agree. I don't know why they put this under the reverse T3 of all the things, which I found interesting, unless it's just like a subcategory of the thyroid panel overall. But reverse T3, this is almost smack dab in the middle of my range that I typically use. Iron status. So the first thing I already don't love is that they included ferritin in the iron markers, which I'm not surprised about. And ferritin is a terrible marker of actual iron levels inside and or outside of the cell because it's impacted by so many things, which I don't love the fact that they include the ferritin in this. So if we look at ferritin specifically, ferritin is 86. So true ferritin level is actually 31, which the range that I typically use is 25 to 100. So a little bit on the low end of normal. I would consider this still okay. I'd want to look at the other markers going on here. If I look at iron saturation is 30%, which I would consider good. 25 to 40% is typically where I'm landing with this. I consider this great. The bigger red flag for me here, though, is the TIBC. So TIBC is marked at 419, which is, I would consider high in my eyes. ChatGPT considers this high normal. So TIBC, the best way I like to describe this is an indication of how much iron the body wants. So the typical pattern that we would see, that I would normally see, is if TIBC is 419, 360 is my high end, just for reference. I would expect to see iron saturation closer to like 18 to 20% versus 30%. So when I see a pattern like this, the body is craving more iron, potentially. And there's another factor that can really play a role when it comes to increased levels of TIBC and iron saturation, and that is higher estrogen levels. So I would be very curious to look deeper into hormones when it comes to this person as to, okay, are they experiencing some symptoms around potentially like high estrogen levels and or low progesterone levels, or both? And or are there some other things going on here as well? So continuing on with the CBC, so they consider the CBC totally normal. I'm going to come back to this because I have wildly different opinions on the CBC. And that is where it ended. And so if we look at the summary here, so strengths, I like that it gives strengths. I like that it gives some areas to improve. And I also like, it's really interesting that it gives here, kind of at the end of ChatGPT, like, it can explain the APOB a little bit further. It can also help with a detox support plan, a thyroid optimization plan, and or a cardiometabolic health strategy. Now, before I go into looking at supplements to help and support with this, I want to go through my actual analysis of this lab work and share a few additional thoughts that I have yet to share when it comes to this. So if I go back and I want to start with vitamin D. So one of the big things, so this lab measures the two markers of vitamin D that are really important. Measures 25-OHD, which we saw, and it considered totally normal, and I would consider that on the higher side. And this also measures 125 dihydroxyvitamin D, or calcitriol, which what happens in the body, and once again, if you go back and listen to our blood testing episode, we dive a little bit deeper into this, but a really short just explanation of what this looks like is We usually get 25 OHD and we look at this. Now that, before it can be absorbed into any of our cells, it has to be converted into this 125 dihydroxyvitamin D. That requires our kidneys to be highly involved, and it also requires a ton of nutrients, specifically like vitamin K and magnesium and zinc are really big ones. Now, both of these markers in an ideal situation should be at a 1-to-1 ratio. We're pretty darn close. So if we look at this other marker, it is 60.9, which for me, that's about a 15-point difference, give or take point something. I'm not great at mental math here. But this would indicate a minor issue. Why are we having some trouble converting that 25 OHD to this other one? Is it going back to the kidneys? Is it nutrient deficiencies? There's also something else that plays a really big role here, and it's a little bit of a generalized term. It's called cell danger response. Basically, it means that your body is so stressed from a cellular perspective that your cells feel stressed, and it causes a ton of issues here. So let's get into where this might be coming from. So if we look at the CBC with differential here, and this plays a really big role in understanding bigger picture. So the first thing that's a red flag for me is the white blood cell count. 3.1 is low. I like to see bare minimum 3.5 or 4 when it comes to white blood cell count, meaning that the immune system is probably under responsive and dealing with something, some sort of infection, some sort of issue going on here, and it's struggling and it's really trying to fight, which if we also look at the high vitamin D levels, this is a big red flag because the vitamin D at the high levels of 76, this really impacts the immune system. And once again, this person feels generally okay. And what I'm about to get into shows some pretty significant red flags of some big things to dive into, which once again, this person was not feeling terrible. And I was a little surprised to see some of these patterns that I'm about to explain. The vitamin D was the first red flag for me that something is going on. So continuing on, we've got red blood cell count. This is trending a little bit high for me. This person is not in a high elevation, which can impact this levels, in which case this person is probably a little bit dehydrated, which absolutely was the case for this person. If we look at everything else looks pretty good, RDW is trending just a little high, which can indicate some generalized inflammation. Now, the big pieces here. So the first one is neutrophils. Neutrophils is listed at 34%, which is considerably low. The range that I use is 50 to 60%. Typically anything under 3.25. Now you'll actually see on the lab itself, the neutrophils, the absolute value at 1.1 is listed as low. So ChatGPT did not pick any of this up, which is really, really interesting considering it was marked on the actual lab and this AI service did not use it. The next big red flag is lymphocytes are at 57%. Lymphocytes should really be at 30 to 37%. This can indicate one of two things. Now, with this stark difference between the neutrophils and lymphocytes, this is usually a sign of autoimmune issues going on, potentially early stage and or potentially not so much. I would consider this early stage in this person. Once again, they didn't have a lot of wild symptoms going on, and this is a very strong pattern that there is some low level autoimmunity going on. Now, when it comes to autoimmunity, if we catch this early, this makes a really big difference. And so this is someone where I would feel pretty confident in saying that there's a strong likelihood that we could put this autoimmunity into remission and or reverse it right off the bat because of how they are feeling. And because that we are able to look at this pattern and identify this as a strong autoimmune pattern, that can be really, really helpful. This is where I landed on my own labs many years ago with my thyroid autoimmunity. And once again, I was able to completely reverse mine and have been asymptomatic for many years from a symptom perspective and also from a lab standpoint. Next thing here, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. These are all three trending on the high end of the ranges that I like to use, which is an indication of a strong parasite pattern. So this person has got some parasite stuff going on. They've got some autoimmune stuff going on. Once again, I'm like, what else is going on? What are the underlying things? Parasites can absolutely play a role here. And I'm going back to like the lipids and some of the blood sugar markers. And if we continue to look down at the full metabolic panel, glucose, fasting glucose is trending high for me. It is at 93. 89 is my higher end range. And so this is definitely an indication there's something going on. Continuing down here, BUN and creatinine are both trending low. This person does not eat a lot of protein in their diet, and it shows on their lab work. Continuing on, some of these look good. CO2, carbon dioxide, is flagged on the labs as well and was not flagged with ChatGPT, which I think is interesting. I would consider this low. 20 or 22 is typically where I like to see on the low end, and this is at 18. This can indicate a stomach acid issue. It can be a couple other things. Stomach acid is the first thing I would typically look at, and then start to dive deeper in some other things that may be going on. Looking at some of these other markers, globulin is trending low. 2.2 is where it's at, and that is the bottom end range of my marker. Once again, this is usually another indication of a B6 deficiency. Bilirubin also trending low. Do we have some bile flow issues, bile duct issues going on? Alkaline phosphatase is also trending low, indication of a zinc deficiency. So there's so many things here that ChatGPT is not picking up on that I do pick up on, or that our practice does pick up on. And then just looking at the rest of these here, homocysteine I would consider okay. LDH is trending low, which is another blood sugar marker. I actually think this is okay. And once again, probably we know there's some blood sugar stuff going on here. And the other one, let's see, the last one that is kind of a big difference here is uric acid. I would consider uric acid trending pretty low, and this goes into kidney health. So when we go back to the vitamin D markers, the question is, okay, are we intaking too much and now this is putting a lot of pressure on our kidneys? Very good argument for yes. In this case, while the other kidney markers looked okay, uric acid is trending low. And so there's a very overwhelming kind of root cause that is coming up for me when I look at all of this, that I want to look at ChatGPT here first and look at their supplementation recommendations before I get into my additional thoughts. So I'm just going to put in here, please provide supplement recommendations based on these labs. And so if we look at this, and this is my biggest problem with AI services, and you're going to see me talk about this with every single lab that we go over in this way, is that it tries to symptom manage with all of the supplements. My favorite one is looking at the Dutch test, because it goes through, it gives like 3 supplements for each piece. And it's not doing a good job at looking at the whole piece all together here. And this is such a clear indication. It recommends omega-3s, which, yeah, I don't think that's bad at all. Niacin, okay, yeah, fine, that may be helpful. And, once again, for us, we always look at, but why? Why are we struggling with this? What is going on, and why do we need this cardiometabolic support? Same thing with glucose and insulin support. Berberine, yeah, that's fine. There's some other things going on here, and cool. All right, iodine and selenium. Well, with this particular autoimmune pattern, it is possible that this person could be low-level Hashimoto's, in which case iodine, if we don't test for it directly, can actually accelerate the progression of the Hashimoto's or the autoimmunity just kind of overall, which I would never recommend. The big CMOS craze that came up a while ago, I can't quite remember, it was probably at least a year ago at this point, but people who actually knew what they were talking about in this space, and especially people who understood Hashimoto's versus just plain hypothyroidism and the differences in how to test for those, we were all super against people blanket supplementing with CMOS because of the high iodine levels. And we know that it can make the Hashimoto's worse and is very contraindicated for the vast majority of people unless we do a specific test to look at iodine levels and look at actual need. Do we actually need iodine for support in this particular case? I would argue no. Ashwagandha, maybe. And for me, once again, I'm looking more at the conversion of T4 to T3. Well, what are the two big players in this? One, the liver, two, the gut. That's where I would start versus ashwagandha. And bigger picture here, if we look at these thyroid markers, they're all trending low, which is an indication of stress. I don't want to support just stress. I want to look at, once again, what is the bigger picture? Why is there stress going on? Is it external stress? Is it internal stress? Is it a combination of both? By the way, it's always a combination of both, pretty much, when we look at a lot of the stressors, bigger stressors going on within our inside of our bodies here. Zinc, yeah, you can absolutely supplement with zinc, and huge precaution when recommending with supplementing with zinc. It's really easy to throw off that zinc and copper balance. Even if someone has lowered zinc and higher copper, which by the way is not an uncommon pattern for me, not necessarily so much anymore, and it was a previous pretty strong pattern that took me a long time to get rid of. A lot of that had to do with iron and the injury I got with my iron markers themselves. But I would never recommend zinc, almost never recommend zinc by itself. Zinc and copper almost all of the time needs to be taken together. You can take oysters, you can take an oyster supplement, there's a great supplement called Zinc Balance by Jar of Formulas that has a great 15-to-1 zinc and copper ratio. I've only made one exception once in my entire career, and that's because the zinc was so crazy low that I really felt we had no other choice to supplement for 2 months before rechecking and seeing where they were. And then we moved them to a zinc and copper kind of ratio here. So magnesium, yeah, I think it's fine that we supplement with magnesium. And once again, what else could be driving the magnesium low? Stress, big one. By the way, that vitamin D is a big one that can be driving down this magnesium. Potentially, maybe not. We supplement with this. I'd want to see like zinc. I'm sorry, not zinc. Sleep. How is sleep? How is mood? Want to get a little bit more symptom information as to what may be going on. Methylated B12 and folate, I don't think we need the folate. The folate was totally fine. B12, yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. And I actually don't like to supplement with either one of these individually. I actually don't like to supplement with both of them together. I like to supplement with B6, B9, and B12. I see the best results out of both of those. And in this case, I'd probably recommend a prenatal multivitamin. So we're going to get a boost of quite a few nutrients going on, especially when we look at bigger things going on inside of the body here. K2, I would not, I would completely cut out the D3, K2, too much. We have too much already, and we definitely don't need more K2. So I'm not a big fan of this. And then DHEA. This one I have a really big problem with. I never recommend DHEA and or anything else that can be converted into hormones, specific sex hormones. DHEA often can be converted to cortisol, and depending on how the body responds to DHEA, it can also be converted into testosterone. In which case, let's say this person had PCOS and we supplement with DHEA. Now we're just making we're going to make the PCOS even worse because the body's going to favor, most likely, converting the DHEA to testosterone, which we do not want. So I would never recommend DHEA unless we did some very specific hormone testing that would include urine and or saliva. So those are just like really big red flags. So for me, bigger picture, what is going on here? What would I really look at? The first thing I look at is this is a pretty clear mold pattern to me. There is blood sugar dysregulation, there are nutrient deficiencies, there is some weird cholesterol stuff going on. Probably mold, especially with the parasite pattern too. There's autoimmunity stuff going on. So bigger picture, the next step would be organic acids test. Obviously, I'm would get more symptoms too. If they checked enough boxes, I would say we probably don't even need to run an organic acids test. And let's say they didn't have a lot of symptoms, the organic acids test would be the next test that I would recommend kind of moving forward here to look at the mold and different things in the body to get a better idea of what is going on and bigger picture. Because if we only supplement with things like what ChatGPT recommended, we're just going to be symptom managing. And we're probably not going to see massive shifts or changes, especially long term when it comes to lab work like this. So we do need to look at bigger picture and kind of work our way in. The thyroid thing would be like the last thing on my eyes because the thyroid's impacted by so many things. We know we have nutrient deficiencies. We've got blood sugar stuff going on. We've got some gut stuff going on. We've got this autoimmune stuff going on, in which case the thyroid is a low level concern because it's impacted by so many things. And if we can look at the bigger picture and address those, oftentimes the thyroid will just even itself out and take care of itself. And if it doesn't, then we can do some additional support work and look a little bit deeper into the thyroid and what still may be impacting it, all that kind of good stuff, but definitely not where I would start. So overall, I'd say the lab work is okay as far as an interpretation perspective, not great, but okay. Recommendations, not great. You are being symptom managed, which is what Western medicine does. It's what a lot of the functional medicine space does. So be very, very careful because you can end up on a ton of supplements if you're just looking at these AI services and using that for your labs. And you could waste a lot of time and a lot of money trying to symptom manage all of these things because it doesn't have the capacity, at least not yet, to look at the bigger picture and understand, okay, what actually bigger picture may be going on versus just like, let's look at all these individual things all together and let's supplement with this, which is basically Western medicine, but with supplements. So that is the blood work piece here. And I think that's a pretty good idea. If you are listening, just be mindful that you can watch this on YouTube. We'll also try and put some of these things down below so that you can input this in and you can see a little bit more visually what we're talking about as far as these actual labs are concerned. So part one, blood work. This is blood work overall kind of thoughts. Okay, not great, not the worst, not the best. Definitely don't follow these supplement recommendations. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As always, please like, subscribe, follow. If it resonates, 5-star reviews really, really, really mean the world to us. And be sure to stay tuned here for a preview of next week's episode. And as a reminder, this is a 3-parter here. So be sure to stay tuned for the upcoming episodes where I go over the Dutch test and the organic acids test when it comes to ChatGPT and how it does with it as far as an analysis and our recommendations are concerned. First of all, this is a urine-based test, which when it comes to hormones, blood work is typically pretty bad when it comes to hormones, looking at hormones, especially for menstruating, perimenopausal type women, because our hormones fluctuate so much, even like minute to minute, hour by hour. And blood work is literally a moment in time, which when it comes to hormones, once again, not great. So I like the urine. We're taking an all-day sample, multiple urine samples throughout the day, which means that we're actually getting a pretty decent 24-hour picture of where hormones are